Good morning and welcome to Focus on the News. I'm Senator Dick Black. I'll be with you for the next 30 minutes or so. Let me start right away with a very interesting comment by Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger, he's a controversial fellow, worked for Richard Nixon, and he was his national security advisor. And the article that came out, this was in Market Watch, but the title's from Market Watch, but actually, I believe they were citing an article from the Wall Street Journal. In any event, the Market Watch article is entitled, "Kissinger Says U.S. is Heading Aimlessly Toward the Brink of War Against Russia and China." What he's talking about is that we are kind of stumbling our way towards World War III, and obviously something that should concern us all. Here are his words. Kissinger is, I think he's 99 years old now, very sharp still. And he's had a long time to look and reflect. And he is tending to be a little bit more outspoken on things than he was, not dramatically. He's still rather cautious, but here's what he says to begin with. He says, "We are at the edge of war with Russia and China on issues which we partially created without any concept of how this is going to end or what it's supposed to lead to." And he goes on, he says, "I think that the current period has great trouble defining a direction. It's very responsive to the emotions of the moment." Now, if you think of what happened recently where Nancy Pelosi, for whatever personal reasons, whatever personal gain she gets out of it, she went to Taiwan. Very, very sensitive issue for the Chinese because Taiwan, they believe, and we have acknowledged in the past that Taiwan is part of the greater China. And it's a very delicate balance that we've kept for a long time. And she went there, obviously, to disrupt that balance and to increase the level of tensions between our countries. Why did she do it? We don't know. My guess is it did not have anything to do with some strategic outlook that she has, but rather some personal family benefits that accrue from the trip. But nonetheless, it has enormous political ramifications, strategic ramifications, because it threatens one of the foundational frameworks of China, and it creates tremendous tensions needlessly. They talk in the article about Kissinger's understanding of diplomacy, and he looks at it as a balancing act between great powers, and it's always overshadowed by the potential for a nuclear catastrophe. Now, just as way of background, when we challenge Russia, Russia and the United States are the two greatest nuclear superpowers. As far as we know, we're roughly equal. My guess would be that the U.S. has a greater amount of nuclear weaponry. The Russians, in some instances, have better delivery means because of the hypersonic missiles. But it's almost academic because each nation maintains about 1,250 nuclear weapons on standby, ready to fire. Now, they have a total of about 5,000 apiece. And those 1,000 are ready to go, but they require a little bit more preparation time than the initial 1,250. Now, so when we talk about the apocalyptic potential of an outbreak between Russia and the United States, to a lesser extent with China, China has a modest nuclear arsenal, roughly 600 weapons compared to the US and Russia's 5,000. So they have enough for their own defense, but particularly dangerous when we talk about conflicts with Russia. Now, the Washington Post, there's been sort of a flurry of interest in the media, and it's a very good thing. Liberal, conservative, people are beginning to say, wait a minute, we do seem to be stumbling towards a nuclear confrontation. Maybe we ought to reflect on what that means. The Washington Post yesterday ran an article, and I've actually just seen the title of it so far. I haven't seen in depth, but they're reporting on a Rutgers University study that is estimating that about 5 billion, that's 5 billion out of 8 billion people will be killed in the aftermath of a nuclear war, probably most of them through starvation. Of course, lots will die from the initial blast. It's important for us as Americans to understand that the nuclear catastrophe will be focused on certain areas. The United States will, let's say that 2/3 of the world's population is killed as a result of a nuclear war. The death toll in the United States is likely to be disproportionate. Europe, disproportionate. There will be a high death toll in Russia just because they would be one of the two blocks that are involved. But what you would have is a lot of those who survive the Holocaust would be those in Africa and those deep in Latin America, where they really have relatively few targets of interest for nuclear powers. So it would be concentrated in the Western world and in some of the Russia, China, and a few allies. So Kissinger goes on talking about, I think the current period has a great trouble defining direction. It's very responsive to the emotion of the moment. And we've seen this recently with the outbreak of the Ukrainian war, where there was sort of, the media was able to whip up a lot of hysteria. On reflection, I think many Americans are saying, boy, this thing has really been a big mistake, but that's sort of evolving. Kissinger believes that Americans just can't really resist interlinking the idea of diplomacy with personal relationships with an adversary. And he says it's, it's almost seeking to condemn other nations rather than trying to reflect on their way of thinking. Let's see, he says, we're at the edge of war with Russia and China on issues we partially created, without any concept of how this is going to end or what it's supposed to lead to. Now, he's very concerned about the question of Taiwan, because Kissinger was responsible for helping to implement the policy that Nixon devised for dealing with China. Nixon, by the way, whatever history says about him, was unquestionably a true genius when it came to foreign policy. And particularly what he did with his China policy was quite amazing. But Kissinger talks about Taiwan, and he worries that the United States and China are maneuvering toward a crisis, and he's counseling what he calls steadiness on Washington's part. Don't become erratic and unpredictable. Be steady, be predictable. And then he says, this is a quote, "The policy that was carried out by both parties has produced and allowed the progress of Taiwan into an autonomous democratic entity and has preserved peace between China and the US for 50 years. One should be very careful, therefore, in measures that seem to change that basic structure." Now, what is the basic structure? Basic structure is that the United States, through a series of moves over several years, recognized that People's Republic of China, with the capital in Beijing, China, is is in charge of all of China, including Taiwan. But we said it and expressed it in a very ambiguous way that was designed not to undermine Taiwanese de facto independence, so that we would say, okay, legally, yes, someday China should complete this reunification, but we're not going to push it. And at the same time, mainland China really didn't push it either. But what you've got a lot of politicians involved, and you know what politicians do, but they're constantly needling, constantly probing, trying to find areas of disagreement. Now, President Trump, when he was in office, I think quite justifiably said, look, we're being taken advantage of in certain areas with trade with mainland China. And so we're going to impose tariffs until we can resolve this. He really did not, this wasn't designed to up the tension. He continued to have good relations with Xi Jinping, the head of China, and but then it's since just sort of gotten all out of control, and now the media is generating all sorts of hatred towards China. It's a very unhealthy situation. Now, Kissinger also he's been controversial because he has been very unimpressed by American policy dealing with Ukraine. And he said the US and NATO may have touched off the crisis in Ukraine. Well, he's a diplomat. The US and NATO did deliberately trigger the war in Ukraine. We did it by overthrowing the government in Kiev, Ukraine, the capital of Ukraine. We overthrew the government, installed a revolutionary junta who then went after the Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine, lodged a war that killed 14,000 of them with enormous help from American weapons that were poured in there. Russia finally had its back to the wall, had no choice. They attacked into Ukraine. And now, unfortunately, the US has not allowed Ukraine to enter into peace talks and to end the war. And it looks increasingly as though Ukraine they're certainly losing the war. They're losing fantastic numbers of casualties, and it begins to appear that Russia soon may attack and capture the ports, the remaining ports that Ukraine has, particularly the big port at Odessa on the Black Sea, which is where they export all of their wheat and most of their exported products. So it's very sad for the people of Ukraine. I hate to see it. There's just a slaughter of young men, Ukrainian young men. This guy Zelensky, he's the world's best actor, the world's biggest clown, and the worst political leader a country could ever have. And he is just milking the political scene for all that he can, and he will probably end up very well off when this is over, and Ukraine will perhaps not exist at all because he refuses to begin peace talks. Okay, so that's this. Let me switch to another topic. This one is interesting culturally, and this is out of Washington State. And it started off, there was an 80-year, here's the, this is from the New York Post. It says 80-year-old who was banned by YMCA for confronting trans worker gets heckled at rally. Well, here's the background. There was a grandmother, 80-year-old woman, and she had been a member of the YMCA in Washington State, and she had been a member of the YMCA for 35 years. So one day she goes in, and she is in the bathroom, and she has a group of little girls that are in there with her, and the girls are 4 or 5 years old, and there is a man pretending to be a woman, and she confronted him. And here's what she says. She said, "I saw a man in a woman's bathing suit watching maybe 4 or 5 little girls putting down their suits in order to pulling down their suits in order to use the toilet. I asked if he had a penis, and he said it was none of my business. I told that man to get out right now." Okay, and then, so when it says, I'm sorry, I said little girls who were 4 or 5 years old. She says 4 or 5 little girls, but I think you get the picture. A group of little girls they're going to the bathroom. You've got a man who's leering at them. He's one of these transgender cross-dressers who's pretending to be a woman, and he is titillating himself by watching naked little girls who are helpless, and no one is able. Now he goes. This very responsible grandmother goes to the YMCA management. She complains about this. She's immediately barred after attending this place for 35 years. She's barred because she complained about a pedophilic appearing guy who is leering at little girls in the bathroom, a man pretending to be a woman. And okay, so that's where it is now. If you look at the greater problem that we face in America today, we're going through this tremendous media-driven trend towards transgenderism, which really is, you can't transform your gender. You can simply pretend to be, you can dress like somebody of the opposite sex. You can have surgical things done sometimes, but most of the men who do it, they don't remove their genitals. So they just wear women's dresses. What's made it so easy for a man who is a pedophile to simply dress as a woman and go in and have access to little girls wherever he wants them. Not only little girls, but big girls too. And we've seen that here in Loudoun County, where we had a high school boy who dressed. He'd throw on a woman's skirt and he'd go in the girls' bathroom and sexually assaulted a girl very, very badly. And then they scooted him off quietly to another high school where he, in short order, assaulted another high school girl. So we see within the liberals, within this country's liberal establishment, you've got radicals in academia who are increasingly defending pedophilia, and they call pedophiles gender-attracted persons. Well, isn't a rapist a gender-attracted person? I mean, how do you do that? A pedophile is a pedophile, and it doesn't matter whether it's a man wearing a girl's skirt or not. He's still a pedophile. As a nation, I'm not talking about this particular case in itself, I'm just saying, as a nation, unless we get sex deviants out of government, out of academia, and out of the public school system, the day's going to come when children will be expected to submit to sex with these cross-dressers and other homosexuals in the public schools. It is coming. No one could have conceived it 20 years ago. No one could have conceived of how perverted and how decadent our public schools are. Nobody would imagine that parents would turn over their children to such a perverted system. But anyway, that's where we are today. Now, switching to another thing, we've got the Trump Mar-a-Lago raid, and as you know, several days ago, the FBI came up with some kind of a concoction where they were able to justify to a U.S. magistrate who seems to gravely dislike Trump, and they got him to issue a search warrant. And instead of going in and quietly coming to the front door and announcing that they have a search warrant and we're going to need to come in, they made a big show with lights and cameras. They made sure that all the news media were present, ready to photograph, and they carried fully automatic weapons so that they could blow up the place. They could attack it and assault it and overwhelm it, and they staged this. They wanted a visual that would somehow they hoped would make Trump look like a criminal and diminish him in the public eyes. That was the objective of this raid. And so when they went in, this is very interesting. They did not want you, the public, the voters, the people who are supposed to be in charge in America, they didn't want us seeing what they were doing. And they didn't want anyone seeing. So they demanded that the security cameras be shut off so that no one would know whether they're planting bugs in the house or whether they're stealing things that they shouldn't be taking. So they stole the president's passports. Now, the passports are not evidence of crime. What are they taking his passports for? Are they thinking that he's going to quietly slip out of the country, slip into maybe wear a dress like one of these people, these liberals do, and put a wig on and somehow go to some African country and hide out? I don't think so. I think they took his passport because they just thought it was cool. They got the president's passport. Let's take this with us. But anyway, I think the FBI was embarrassed into returning his passports, and they just took boxes and boxes of things. It was clearly a fishing expedition. They didn't know what they were going to do. They just opened their arms. They grabbed everything in sight, just like a burglar would do. Obviously, something that should never happen in any civilized Western country. These are the kinds of things we've always criticized third world nations for doing. Countries in Latin America or in Africa or some in the Mideast, where you'd say, okay, countries that have less developed governments, they do this kind of thing. Well, the FBI, the Department of Justice do it. And I have no question in my mind that the president, people around the president were informed that this was going to happen. So it's interesting. The mainstream news tried to create confusion over this. CBS News anchor Norah O'Donnell put out a tweet that said the FBI did not have President Trump's passports. And then, obviously that was false. I think even the FBI didn't try to hide it. And so, but even after she knew that Trump was, that report was obviously unfair and untrue, she left the tweet up after it had been debunked. And it's the same thing we saw on January 6th, where they put out a fake story about people attacking a police officer with a fire extinguisher. Totally made up, totally manufactured. It wasn't an incident that they sort of expanded on or hyped up or something. It never happened. Nothing of the sort ever happened. They just made it up to throw the public off. And I think this is the type of thing we see with the fake report on that the FBI didn't have the passport. The FBI had the passport, proof beyond reasonable doubt. The FBI has returned the passports, so they obviously had them. Okay. Let me just reflect for a few minutes. I was the chief of the criminal law division for the Army, but before that, I ran major legal offices at Fort Leonard Wood, at Fort Ord, at Fort Lewis, Washington. I was the most prominent of all of the staff judge advocates in the Army. You had to be appointed by the Judge Advocate General to become a staff judge advocate. There were almost no staff judge advocates who were appointed at three very major, successively more responsible roles as a staff judge advocate. Eventually, I became chief of the criminal law division at the Pentagon. Now, I never had a controversy over a search. And this is in an entire career as a prosecutor. Never had one, and yet I oversaw thousands of cases. And at the same time, I was viewed as being somebody who could crack down hard on crime, could bring law and order to a particular military base where where law and order had been lax previously. So I was successful, but at the same time, I had a great respect for the U.S. Constitution. And I had a little rhyme that I made up, and I used to instruct my trial counsel. I'd have anywhere from 25 to 40 attorneys who I was responsible for in some way. And some of them were United States attorneys. Most of them were judge advocate attorneys. I think I had probably a dozen assistant U.S. attorneys, maybe more. But in any event, I would instruct them and I would say, in order to get a search warrant approved, I want you to be able to demonstrate in your affidavit that establishes probable cause that there is particular evidence of a particular crime at a particular place at a particular time. The time usually being right now, that it's there, not right now. Sometimes you would get a warrant to go in because you know that on, Friday of this week, there's supposed to be a drug delivery to this location, and you could get a warrant that would say, okay, on Friday, you can go in and you can seek it. So particular evidence of a particular crime at a particular place at a particular time. We never had a problem with a search warrant ever. And this, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of search warrants. And, but the thing is, you can't just say, I think somebody must be involved in something. Let's go in and let's just scour through and look for everything. The founders of the Constitution knew this was a huge danger to individual liberty. And so that's why the Fourth Amendment was passed in the Bill of Rights. And it guaranteed that there would be no search and seizures except upon probable cause. And probable cause means that it is more likely than not that there is particular evidence of a particular crime at a particular place at a particular time. That's Colonel Black's wisdom in the JAG Corps. And so this was not, in my opinion, from the bits and pieces we know, this was not a legitimately authorized warrant. Now, I'm not sure whether the fault lay with the magistrate. I suspect a lot of the fault was with the FBI and with the Department of Justice, with the Attorney General, and whoever told the Attorney General that this would be a great idea to get ready for the midterm elections. Let's bust the president. But in any event, the idea, apparently they took, they took a lot of boxes of things, and some things apparently were marked top secret. Keep in mind that the president has a substantial federal staff. He has Secret Service agents within his house, outside of his house. Most of the people working in his home are cleared for top secret SCI, compartmentalized intelligence. I used to have an SCI, TSSCI clearance, and the president retains that clearance for a lifetime. And now every president takes records when they leave the White House. So Trump didn't do anything extraordinary. Now, nobody else is supposed to take records. So there's a great distinction between Hillary Clinton and Trump. Trump was the president of the United States. Hillary Clinton was a cabinet member. And so she had no right to have top secret. And we we have pretty good indications. You know, she wiped 32,000 emails after she received a legal subpoena to retain and preserve those materials. But in any event, every president takes records. That's how we end up with presidential libraries. A lot of those records are ones that were in the possession of various presidents. Some of them are borrowed from the National Archives. But the fact is, you know, Trump, he's a pretty busy guy. Doesn't have the time to sit around and sift through old records. I'm going to tell you, I'm doing some autobiographical work. I get records that go back to 1963. I'm talking about records I have not looked at since 1963. And they're in archives. I mean, I'm discovering things that I had forgotten half a century ago. This is just the way it is. People don't spend their time thumbing through boxes and boxes of old records. He may not know what's in the records. And his lawyers, they say, oh, his lawyers said there were no top secret. They may not know what's in the records. I mean, they may be saying, to the best of their knowledge and belief, they don't have anything. But anyway, there's no doubt that the raid on Mar-a-Lago has been a real dagger to the heart of our constitutional system. It has given us the appearance of being a rather unstable government, and it's very unhealthy for us. Okay, so let's look at something that is very healthy, and we'll close on what I consider a very happy note. And this is the election. And it's the one I want to talk about and home in on is that Republican voters in Wyoming just ousted Liz Cheney in a show of loyalty to Donald Trump. Now, that's what this headline says from Jezebel.com. But in any event, everybody is aware. It's being reported all over now. You know, Wyoming, every state under the Constitution has to have at least one congressman. And so I think there are about 5 who have one congressman by virtue, not of their population, but by virtue of the fact that every state has to have one. Very small population in Wyoming, relatively speaking. And so they have one congressman for the whole state. Typically, you would think somebody from Wyoming would be, they're elected the congressman for life because it's very Republican. Once you get in, if you act responsibly, you're going to be there forever. But she was not only voted, not only defeated, but it was one of the worst election thumpings ever. I don't know whether Wyoming's ever had a worse thumping. Probably not in their race for certainly not for an incumbent congressman. It was just horrific for Dick Cheney's daughter. She lost. She only got 29% of the vote. This is in a place that she has represented for years. But keep in mind that she really shifted over to the Democrats in a big way, and she voted to impeach Donald Trump, and then on top of that, she asked to get on board, become part of this January 6th debacle, this Democrat committee that's designed to frame the president, and she's been working on that very publicly. Just a vocal hater of Donald Trump. She is the the daughter of America's most prominent draft dodger and warmonger, Dick Cheney. The combination. I mean, there are other warmongers, but he dodged the draft repeatedly, and in any event, a great coward who was big on thumping his chest and sending other men off to war to fight wars that he was unwilling to fight himself. And he is blamed for the deaths of 1 or 2 million very innocent people, principally in Iraq, but other countries. But he was all for war. He wanted to take over all of these Middle Eastern countries, overthrow the governments, install puppet governments. So he's part, and he is, and his daughter Liz Cheney, part of the Bush dynasty, this mega wealthy dynasty with enormous fortunes that back up the Bush family and to some extent the Cheney family. Very few people are aware, but Liz Cheney, in the last 18 months of Trump's presidency, she organized Democrats to pass an amendment that would make it very cumbersome for Trump to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. She effectively blocked Trump from conducting a smooth, orderly withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan, which was long overdue. And to some extent, I think she is responsible for the debacle that followed when Biden did this. You know, he pulled out of Afghanistan, but he did it in this chaotic, crazy way that just led to upheavals and the immediate overthrow of the Afghan government. And but she organized the Democrats to do that, and it was basically her and a group of Democrats voting to put this provision onto a bill. Now, what's she going to do in the future? You know, it's very seldom that you see somebody who gets less than a third of the vote when they're up for re-election talking about their political future, but she does. She intends to run as a spoiler in the upcoming presidential elections to keep the Republicans from winning the White House in 2024. Now, she has no hope of winning, but what she is likely to do is to try to get 4 or 5%. She'll try to get on the ballot as perhaps an independent Republican or something or other, but she'll say, oh, I'm a Republican, I'm running as an independent, but I'm a Republican. And she will try to get 4 or 5% to bleed off that much in hopes that the Democrats can win and we can have a continuation of the incredibly disastrous rule that they have imposed on the country. And we've seen just in the last 18 months how the country has just been shaken to its foundations by the Biden administration. So we will see what happens, but I think that we can all sit back and we can take some pleasure in the fact that that Liz Cheney has been ousted. So, ding dong, the witch is dead. The wicked witch, the witch is dead. This has been Dick Black with Focus on the News, and we'll see you next Monday.